He collects people.
I've never seen his face. Have you?
You know I haven't.
All right, welcome to Decoding TV's conversation about the Acolyte episode 4. Before we get to this episode, Patrick, I want to discuss some of the reactions and feedback we got to last week's conversation about episode 3. So we got a bunch of comments over at decodingtv.com, and I wanted to read some of these and react to them. So Shane writes into decodingtv.com, last week during the Coven's standoff with the Jedi, Torben goes into some sort of fugue state, and Anastasia says, "If you want your Padawan returned to his right mind, I suggest you all leave," which suggests she's able to permanently alter one's mental state. So I'm thinking Osha and Sol's memories of May's involvement in the fire and her subsequent death were fabricated by Anastasia. That way, everybody believes May died in the fire, so nobody will come looking for her, while Anastasia continues to train her in secret. It's also possible Anastasia did something similar to convince May that the Jedi are responsible for the fire, but that doesn't quite line up with the scene where Torben felt the need to apologize to May before drinking the poison. Maybe he just felt guilty because he thinks Jedi had no business meddling with the Coven in the first place, and it was their fault that the situation escalated in the way it did, end quote. What are your thoughts on this theory, Patrick Klepek? I think it's certainly very plausible, right? The idea that memories of how the fire went were implanted in everyone by Mother Anastasia. Like, that seems very plausible to me as an explanation. Patrick, any thoughts?
I don't know what's happening there, right? We don't have a great sense of the power set of these witches. And I think that is potentially on purpose. And this theory would line up neatly with, hey, like, we've already got inclinations of, like, the birth of these children are, well, maybe with the Jedi deem unnatural, right? I think, it's potential that we'll find out that it's like, well, whatever, whatever the cops deem to be natural, that's what's natural. And so I think it still remains to be seen exactly what is sort of the pecking order and interpretation of, again, power, how it's used, how it's authored, how it's given out. But I would not be shocked if what we found out was that an extent of the powers of the Coven contributed to how things ended up.
Yeah, we'll see what Anastasia's role was in what happened, if any. Ji's Young writes into decodingtv.com, the episode 3 was probably their favorite episode by far. Sure, the child actors weren't the best, but it played hand in hand with their innocence and naivete. Every one of the witches, including May, knew that the Jedi being there was bad news. They've had to hide their existence in order to keep practicing their ways of the Force. Osha's wish to be able to roam free without hiding was not wrong, but the systems that the Jedi and the Republic has put in place constrains Osha's aspirations to ever become a reality. Her mother knows this along with the other witches. Yes, you can be free, but first you have to leave everything behind and take on a new dogma, the Jedi. Oh, and by the way, the reason you and your people can't be free is because the Jedi control the galaxy and make the rules. The way Saul basically hands over his lightsaber to a child to fawn over is like an army recruiter promising a bright future. Boy, Padawan Torben sure seems to be excited there. I'm sure this Jedi life is working out for him. He doesn't hate that he's doing all this. Clearly, the 10 years of silence and meditation was for another reason, sarcasm. I only hope that they can really explore what is clearly the Jedi's hunger to exploit a dyad in the Force. If they can't have them, then no one can, because clearly something that powerful must be under the Jedi's supervision and not with this coven of witches, who I think will eventually become what we know today as the Night Sisters of Dathomir or another coven in relation to them. Also, it's been explored in the universe of coercing parents into allowing children to join the Jedi from the TV series and movies, like they don't really have a choice because of their position in life. With young Anakin and his mother, who were slaves, Qui-Gon Jinn literally says he is not there to free the slaves, but he will take Anakin, which always gobsmacks me every time. Qui-Gon Jinn, not a good dude, end quote. Great message over at decodingtv.com. And yeah, the way that the Jedi treat children in Star Wars universe, I think is really troubling, and I think this show further highlights it. Patrick, any other thoughts?
Yeah, and I'm with the person commenting that I hope it's something the show continues to explore. Not necessarily in the episode we just watched, but potentially in other episodes that are to come. I hope it will, because it's the part of this setting and the detail of this particular story that I find the most interesting, because it can add the most amount of wrinkles to what we think of this universe. And so I'd be very disappointed if the show left it where it is without exploring that further. Absolutely.
Well, let's talk about the Acolyte episode 4 entitled Day. What did you think overall of this episode, Patrick?
Wow. Did not particularly care for it. Feels like a show treading water, characters making decisions that I didn't feel like were earned in the running time. that we're presented with. I hate the feeling that it feels, this is an episode that would certainly fall in the category of feels like a movie diced up into a television show. I think that's often an unfair criticism of a lot of the Marvel and Star Wars stuff. But if you remove that sort of interpretation of it, it has pacing issues. I have strong problems with the pacing of how the storytelling has happened in this season. And as a whiplash to the previous episode that I found to be really strong and really interesting and exploring a lot of the thematic work and world building that I thought was potentially the most interesting, where this episode leaves us, like especially where the cliffhanger was, it left a sour taste in my mouth. And I'm hoping the next episode will right those wrongs.
I mean, I gotta say, I largely agree with you. This is a pretty rough episode, probably the roughest out of the 4 that we've seen so far. And I agree that the pacing issues are starting to show themselves. You're not the first person that's wondered, should this show have been an email? Or in other words, should they have made this into a movie instead of stretching it out into 8 episodes? Honestly, shockingly little happens in this episode, and what does happen is confusing and off-putting, is what I would describe it as.
Yeah.
So let's talk about it though. Let's talk about what actually happens in this episode. Let's try to figure some of the stuff out as to what's going on here. We open on Coruscant, where we're training with the Padawan, played by Daphne Keane. Osha thanks her for finding her sister and clear her name, but she thinks it's time for her to go. May is a Jedi's problem now, and Osha's not a Jedi. We see the Jedi studying footage of May, and they speculate on what her deal is. Could this be a splinter order, someone says? Either way, they feel very threatened by her, and Vernestra suggests they handle this situation themselves, rather than informing the Senate and getting all those big government bigwigs involved. Sol insists on going to Kofar and apprehending May himself, and he manages to recruit Osha to join his crew before she leaves. I don't know if there's anything really to unpack there, but they head to Kofar. And we see that May and Kymir are on Kofar. We learn a little bit more about the deal that May made with her master, whose identity we don't yet know. There's a quote here. There's all this stuff about May. You need to kill one of these Jedi. You need to kill them without a weapon. And it says, your final lesson is one you teach yourself. You will kill a Jedi without a weapon. Attacking a defenseless person goes against everything the Jedi stand for. How do you kill someone like that? End quote. I think that is an exact transcription. I have to say I'm a little confused. So is the deal that you need to kill someone without a weapon? They don't have a weapon and you don't have a weapon? And because
what constitutes a weapon? If I use the Force to rip down a sharp tree branch and then shove it at them, I mean, that's just a stick.
Well, it sounds like it's more important that they don't have a weapon than that she doesn't have a weapon.
Right. But if they grab one, do you got to run away?
It's also extremely important that she doesn't have a weapon, because when she got the poison, that was oh, that's a big deal. You're not supposed to do that.
Right.
So basically, I'm saying I think based on literally the text in the show, the parameters of the challenge are still a little bit vague, in my opinion. You may feel differently, but
no, I don't feel differently, and I think part of what is making that harder to stomach or deal with is that who's this villain? Why are we doing this? There's just a distinct 4 episodes in lack of concrete motivation for why are these tasks so important? Why do they have to be done this way? And the show is treating it as a mystery, and I'm irritated that I don't know more of why it's a mystery. And I think that's speaking to some of the pacing issues of the show. We're halfway through. We now know that a character who has been portrayed as a villain isn't really a villain. It's more complicated. But then who's the villain? Why are they a villain? And that part is just not it's a mystery show. And I'm getting irritated at the rollout of answers or context or texture to those mysteries. And that can prove a fatal flaw for a show unpacking itself that way.
Well, let's not do a Dave's Nitpick Corner today. Instead, let's do a Patrick and Dave speculate on who actually is the master in this case. Okay, so there are some options I can throw at you, and we can decide which one of them we think is most likely. All right, so we'll save that for the end. Sol and the crew travel to Kofar. We learned that the Order stationed Kelnaka, the Wookiee Jedi, on Kofar, but no one has heard from him in over a year. He's unresponsive to their transmissions. Locals say that Kelnaka, the Wookiee Jedi, has ventured into the forest and never come back. So there's a few scenes that happen as they journey towards Kelnaka. Osha asks Yord for a favor. She says, you need to stop May in case I can't. in case I hesitate, you need to kill May, which is quite a thing to ask Yord, but he doesn't really agree to it, but he's like, hey, I think Soul has plans for you. Okay, whatever those are. We meet a cute little guy. I thought you'd like this. Patrick Klepek loves when we meet cute little guys.
I do. And this show has cute little guys, weird little freaks. It's hitting
weird
those.
Little robot dude. There's a weird little robot dude. We meet the little like beaver dude, right?
Great.
This character's name is Basil, and in the subtitles for this show, it says he speaks a language called Tinin, I think. But anyway, he's also a tracker, and so they're using his tracking abilities to try to track down May on the planet Kofar. There's a brief scene where they're surrounded by these enormous bugs on trees. Like, you think these trees are just differently shaped, but it's actually there's these massive bugs on trees, which is kind of cool. Osha senses one of them using the Force, but it causes them to freak out, and then Soul needs to cut one of them in half. And Osha reflects on how she can't accept death, but the Padawan says it's an honor to see a creature transform into the Force, I think are the words she used, which I thought was kind of an interesting way of putting that. Pretty big euphemism for slicing someone in half. But
well, and anyway. I have to say, I'm probably creating unrealistic expectations for myself watching this show in parallel with finishing out Scavenger's Reign.
Yes.
Which I'm watching on Netflix for the ratings.
Love
and it. Because there is a show that is doing best in class, like, ecosystem building.
Yes.
And so then in the Acolyte, it's like, oh, great. You put some weird bugs around a tree. Way to go.
Wow.
You know what I mean? It's just, it's terribly unfair. But like watching Scavenger's Reign, which is like the most detailed, thoughtful, interesting, evocative alien planet I've probably maybe ever seen depicted in a science fiction show. And then, like, I don't know, the bugs are on the TV. It's unfair, but yet that's with the two shows I have kind of juggling in my head simultaneously.
I mean, I was just gonna say I think the bugs look pretty cool, you know.
They did.
But apparently it's complete dog shit to Patrick Klepek. So
no,
what are you gonna do? All
Stop.
right. Late in the episode, May and Chimere are walking around trying to find Kelnaka, just chilling, and then Chimere steps into a trap that incapacitates him. All of a sudden, May has an abrupt change of heart. She says, I don't need to keep this deal with the master. Osha being alive changes everything. My loyalty is to Osha, not your master. I'm going to surrender to Kelnaka and turn myself into the Jedi.
Okay.
No idea what motivated that character change. That is pretty weird, right?
It's not an impossible character change to buy. It's impossible to buy at the pace and it happened, the context and what, like the idea that she has thought, unaware of her sister's existence. Like, I can buy the two of them changing each other's minds and motivations, but it's just happening too quickly in a way for it to feel in any way natural. In many ways, I kept waiting for another shoe to drop. Like, well, it can't be as simple as that, right? Well, so far appears to be as simple as that, which is bad. And it's weird because I love shorter stories. I do not think I think a huge consequence of the streaming era has been, you know what's great? 75 minutes in a television show. No, that's you don't have to do that if you need the time. Right. And so I was encouraged by, hey, you know, less than 10, 30 to 35 minute episodes. That sounds like some economic storytelling that knows what it wants to do. Get in, get out. And frequently my feeling in these episodes is I realized this was an hour or like 42 minutes. We just had more time to let these character beats breathe and give a natural sense to it. And somehow it feels like a mess and isn't setting me up emotionally for what I'm sure are going to be big moments to come as these characters get closer in proximity to one another.
Yeah, because if I recall correctly, Osha's last interaction with May was she almost shot her in the head, right? Like that was kind of, I understand like, oh, the idea Osha's alive, that's a big deal. I get that. By the way, May has already murdered 2 Jedi, right? Like,
you're going to jail. I know. I know. It's all good though.
This is like you're halfway through the bank heist and you've already killed 2 guards. And you're like, you know what? I don't need to do this. It's like, well, kind of you do at this point, you know?
Right.
You kind of might as well follow through at this point. You know what I'm saying? Like,
well, it's one thing if she was to propose, I would like a meeting with my sister. Like, I need to work some shit out.
Something.
Not like, I got good intel. Like, I'm gonna give up some people, and like it's all like it's just
It's all
none
gonna
of
be
that.
fine. Yeah. Now, maybe we're gonna find out something in later episodes that like retroactively explain this extremely abrupt about face, but I doubt it. Based off of how the show's been operating so far, who knows? Who knows?
And even if we do, it shouldn't feel this odd, abrupt, bad in the moment. Like the balance you're looking for in a story that may be better informed by context that the audience doesn't know yet should still feel satisfying along the way. And then it's given greater context, more informed context later. Here, it just feels like, okay, we thought wait another 10 minutes. Like we don't. So like, we need to move this chess piece over here. And this is the only way to do it. And that feels odd for a show that is as short as it is. And you would imagine some of that storytelling got worked out more concretely ahead of time. I mean, again, you're right that maybe there's more to come, but it doesn't feel good now.
Well, if you thought that was an unsatisfying payoff, wait until the end of the episode. Basil finds May, and then May finds Kelnaka. She finds him first, but Kelnaka is already dead. Looks like a lightsaber cut to the chest. Turns out May's master is here. He shows up. He owns everyone with a force blast as we cut to credits. Who knows who killed Kelnaka? Maybe it was May's master. Seems like it. I have to say seems like it, but who knows? Who knows? If it was the master, then it's like, well, why did he need to send May to do any of this shit? Like, that's kind of unsatisfying. And then I will say the master character showing up was kind of cool. Like when and by the way, in general, this episode looks really good, I would say. Like them like journeying across Kofar, it like largely looks awesome. It looks like they did it like on location outdoors. It doesn't look like they shot it on the volume, and I think a lot of it looks great. And when the master shows up at the end, very cool. You know, all the Jedi's lighting up the lightsabers, that all looks cool. And then the Force Blast is cool. He's like, oh wow, this guy is really formidable. Like, actually, we don't even know if the master is a guy, but this character is really formidable. Some cool stuff there. But yeah, just kind of baffling development after baffling development.
You're gonna promise me, show, a Wookiee Jedi, a fucking Wookiee that can take out a lightsaber, and then just kill his ass.
How do you not deliver on that, right? Patrick, maybe we're going to see Wookiee with lightsaber in flashback later on. You know, maybe that's.
I can only hope, because otherwise, what a colossal failure from a series that is like a mixture of cool characters than just that's cool. That's that. I think that's neat, and you know what's neat is a Wookiee with a lightsaber. Come on. When I saw him dead in that chair, like, I wanted to throw my water in the air. Like, come on, not even a scene of him like pulling out the lightsaber and then dying at the hands of the master. You know, you're right. I can imagine a scenario in the next episode where the master sits down, explains what happened, and we get to see a version of that scene.
Yes.
But, come on. The problem is, I think it plays into like broader issues I have with the show, this episode in particular, which I think is far and away the messiest and the weakest of what we've seen so far, is it falls in line with something we said a couple of times here, which is, well, what if they show us something cool in a flashback later? Too often in this episode, I'm telling myself, well, hopefully that's a problem this episode created for itself that it solves later. And that's just not a great place to be from like a sense of cool imagery, from interesting storytelling, from character dynamics, and it has left a pit in my stomach where I'm just so worried about the back half of this show now, in a way that you don't want to feel halfway through the show. And so I'm still rooting for it. There's a lot to like, but oh boy, like this episode really has left me very anxious to watch the next one. If only so I can, like, I want to get back on the train. Let me back on. And they keep kicking me off with poor storytelling. I don't like it. But it's unfortunate. But I agree that the world looked cool. It felt like they were on sets. Whether it was the volume or not, it felt like a place. And that's kind of the trick to the volume, right? Like if you can tell, it's the volume can do cool things, but it's kind of in a matter of the filmmakers, how they pull that off. And I agree that part was great, but that feels like I'm grasping at straws in an episode. It's like, well, your very expensive world looked cool, and there's not much else to go on.
Yeah, pretty rough episode. Okay, in lieu of Dave's nitpick corner this week, let's speculate about who the Master might be. Let us assume for the moment that the Master is a character we've already met. Because if it was a complete other character, I think it would be pretty unsatisfying at this point. So here are some of the biggest contenders for who the Master might be. And I want us to kind of have a vote in our mind for who we think the Master is, and then we can kind of compare at the end of the show, right? The character that a lot of people think the Master is Chimere, right? You notice you never see Chimere and the Master in the same place at once.
Oh,
when it would have been very easy for that to have happened this episode, but a lot of people think, oh, the Master is just Chimere, right? Now, would that be a particularly satisfying outcome? I don't know, but it's something. It'd be a thing, you know. Mother Coral from The Witches. This would be the character that carried May and Osha to term, right? Like their mother for all intents and purposes, who didn't make them but carried them. Mother Anastasia, who is the character who created them. Could Mother Anastasia be the Master? Vernestra. This is the green-faced Jedi. And the one vote in that favor is in favor of Vernestra being the Master is that she's really trying to keep all this on the DL, and like that's kind of underhanded of her, and maybe therefore
that's a good point.
So those are the options. I have to say I don't find any of those particularly like I feel like any one of those would disappoint me in some way. Are there any? I don't think there's any others that would be plausibly who the Master is, right? Like,
no. And we speculated, I think last week, about the Darth Plagueis of it all, like, character.
Yeah. Darth Plagueis.
Who's been referenced in Star Wars lore, but has never been depicted.
Well, the thing is, I don't think Darth Plagueis has come up once.
No,
in this topic, right? In conversation in the show.
No, and it just doesn't. Dave Filoni, if he was running this show, 100%, all my chips on Darth Plagueis, because here's a guy who likes to take some weird Star Wars lore nobody cares about and like try and make it legitimate. I
think you are dismissing the possibility of this being Darth Plagueis too rapidly, in my opinion.
I might be. It doesn't. The show has not struck me so far as being interested in archaic Star Wars mythology brought to live action, and so I'm more inclined to believe that, especially given the structure of the show and its like relationship dynamics, Mother Coral would be my bet, that it is someone from the Coven who it was aggrieved by the Jedi, and then was part of an incident that may have involved, magic, force, threads, whatever you want to call it, that like the truth of those events have been buried. That guy who went silent for 10 years, as someone who wrote in, hiding something, not just as simple as, I guess we shouldn't have shown up and things went bad. Feels like little more to the story here that we're unaware of. And so my money is on Coral as being, especially because she mentioned, I carried them to term and then chose to hand the parenting duties to you, but I disagree with how you're parenting. I don't think you're being forceful enough. And what would be more forceful than to exact revenge with one of the children in a way that is very specific on the Jedi Order that undermined the Coven in general. So that's my theory, that, and it makes sense with, it would shock me from a storytelling perspective if we're just pulling from the lore book or inventing a character from whole cloth that we haven't seen. It just doesn't feel consistent with how the show has set itself up so far, but I could be wrong.
I would agree. And if it was, say, Darth Plagueis, like that would be pretty disappointing. Like because the show doesn't even need to introduce that as a character, but you need to talk about it. You need to like have mentioned Darth Plagueis. Otherwise, it's just going to come in and be like, "What?" Like
the audience and the characters, like there's like, "I am Darth Plagueis." This big moment, and I'm like, "Huh?"
and also this is a show that kind of explicitly is trying to not require much knowledge of lore, right? Like because of where
they've said that in the interviews leading up to the show, and so that would seem very weird to pull like one of the biggest drops imaginable that the series has danced around for this long to do so here. So I mean, anything can happen, but I would find that not just shocking, but frankly disappointing for the story that it's trying to tell.
Okay, I think Mother Coral is a very good, like for the reasons you've discussed, is a very good vote for who it is. I'm gonna just choose the boring choice and go with Chimere.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like
okay.
I don't think that's a particularly interesting choice, but like everyone seems to think, people think it's so obvious it's Chimere that it's gone all the way around to people think it's like a red herring and that like it's not actually Chimere. That the people think the show wants us to think it's Chimere, but in fact it's not actually Chimere. Like that's kind of where things are. But so far the show is not super proven to me that it could do something that underhanded. So I'm gonna just go with Chimere and we'll see how things play out.
Okay.
I would agree with you that of the two, Mother Coral seems more likely to be a serial killer than Mother Vernestra. So I think that's a good choice. Mother Anastasia, that's what I meant. And as for Vernestra, the Green Jedi, that would be like a really interesting choice. But I think it just, people would notice, like, hey, you ever notice whenever Saul goes on a mission, that Vernestra also vanishes? That would be people. I think that would have been noticed by the Jedi Council at some point.
Yeah.
So, but that would be like, wow, what a twist. That would be a huge twist if that was the case. I'm trying to think if there's any other characters that we haven't thought of that could be.
I don't think so.
But again, I mean, it's basically either those choices or some character we haven't been introduced to on the show, right?
Right.
And we're Patrick and I are desperately trying to assume that it's not the latter because that would be not satisfying. So, because we are already at the halfway point, we've passed the halfway point of the show already. So it's not like we're in episode 1 or 2 still. So anyway, rough episode of the Acolyte. Hopefully things improve. But we'll see. Hey everyone, David Chen here. Thank you so much for watching that video from Decoding TV. If you want to get an audio version of the show, all you got to do is go to podcast.decodingtv.com. And if you want to support what we do, get ad-free episodes of the podcast and also bonus episodes of the podcast, go to decodingtv.com and become a paid member. Of course, you can also like and subscribe for more. We appreciate it. Thanks. See you later.